Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Everyman's Odyssey podcast, where we explore the challenges and values of authentic living through sharing stories and ideas. I'm your host and founder of the podcast, Cole McClure. I want to start this episode with a question. And the question is, have you ever failed at anything? Now, if your immediate answer is no, go ahead and pause this and think harder. And now, once you've remembered something specific that you have failed at, think about how that made you feel and how did you move on from that? And depending on the severity of the failure you're thinking of, have you even moved on from that? Um, I've been thinking a lot about the topic of failure recently, and whether that's because of my own insecurities or deficiencies in my own life, or conversations that I'm having at work. It seems like we all struggle with thinking that we're missing the mark on at least a couple things in our lives. And the reality is that that's probably true. And so, knowing that, what do we do about that? Um, in this episode, I'd like to take some time and reflect and discover those areas in our lives where we are failing, um, and what that means for our potential and our futures, and really delve into what's the correct way to respond to these failures. Inevitably, we're all going to make mistakes, and some of them will just immediately work out. And I'll think, oh, well, thank goodness that happened. Just leads me right into this. And some of them are a real struggle to get through. So I want to take some time and discuss how we can turn our failures into a resource that we draw from for our success instead of something that we see as holding us back from who we want to be. So, in the spirit of honesty and transparency, let's just start with the list of some of my own failures. This, of course, won't be a comprehensive list because we just don't have time for that. Um, but if you listened to a recent podcast episode where I kind of shared my story, you'll remember that there was a time during flight training where I came closer to crashing a helicopter than anybody really wants to get. And that was because I had failed to recognize my surroundings and failed to implement the proper procedures based on that scenario. Another failure that comes to mind specifically is a time years ago now that I interviewed for a law enforcement agency in a neighboring county. They had asked a basic interview question that was pertinent to the job, and I failed so miserably to articulate any sort of intelligent answer that I immediately knew that, not only am I not going to get this job, it made me question if I'm even cut out for or prepared for that type of job at all. Um, and lastly, I can't even count the times that I have failed to communicate properly or show love appropriately and effectively as a husband. Now, this episode isn't just a story time of all of my failings, but I wanted to mention a few to illustrate the point that we've all made mistakes and we've all failed, even when we try our best and even when we have the best intentions. Sometimes it's just not enough. And not only is that okay and natural, it's a necessary part of life. And it's important to not be ashamed and to be able to talk about those things, not only for yourself, so that those failings don't have power over you or to hold you back or anything, but that you don't keep them to yourself and that your failures are lessons for the people around you as well. And so we are going to cover the lessons that I've learned from each of those failures. But real quick, I'm just gonna skip to the end and give you a spoiler about the key to all of this, and it's perspective. Um, and I think what I mean by that is summed up very well in a quote from the original Stoic philosopher Zeno. He was a very successful merchant sailor who lived, over 2,000 years ago. A very wealthy man who was shipwrecked and lost everything, immediately thrown into poverty. And what he's attributed to saying of this life altering catastrophe is that he, quote, had the great fortune of suffering a shipwreck, uh, counted it as a blessing and a great thing to have this horrible, life altering circumstance just thrust upon him. You see, this concept can be found in Stoic philosophy in the term amor fati, which means to love fate, which is to appreciate and embrace everything that happens to you. And this is a concept that is reinforced biblically in Scripture in Romans 8, verse 28, which says, "We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." And so this highlights the idea that, yeah, maybe not everything that happens to us is good, but everything that happens can be used for good, which in the end means it's something to be grateful for. And that unlocks the key to being grateful for failure and embracing it and using it and it becoming a source of power in your life, not a weakness. So now that we got the spoiler out of the way, let's use some of my failures as an example and what I've learned from that and how we move forward. So first, let's talk about flight school. Wouldn't I have been better off having not experienced that and having just built my confidence, getting that first solo flight done perfectly and landing and moving on? Um, I certainly would have felt better in the moment, not getting chewed out by instructors, not feeling so incompetent and terrified. But as I got further and further away from that, what I realized was that was so valuable. Uh, the lesson there is a lesson that I should have learned long ago because the Army drills that into you. It's just the idea that complacency kills. Um, I got complacent and just blocked out my surroundings and just went with the plan that I had in my head originally, not being open to circumstances changing. And if I had done everything right, I would have had more confidence, maybe, but I would have had more arrogance. And I wouldn't have respected and realized the risk in what I was doing. Um, and speaking of risk, actually, the whole thing that prompted me to want to talk about this is there was something that had happened at work with two of my coworkers. Nobody was hurt, everybody was fine, but something happened where there was a risk to their safety. Um, and now one of the individuals involved, is feeling terrible about what had happened. Like, oh man, am I doing this job right? Am I even good at this job? Should I be doing this? Should I be here? And those are all natural feelings to have when you make a mistake that compromises your safety or somebody else's safety, or makes it look like you don't know what you're doing sometimes. But it just reminded me of what had happened in flight school. Um, what I did, compromised my safety, but I never made that mistake again. And so Uh, when these two individuals had this issue at work, everybody was fine. You know, it's okay. The important thing was that everybody was all right. And now that will almost certainly never happen again because that lesson sticks in your mind so much better than doing it right the first time. And so there is even more value in your failure than there is in your success. Because as you go through life and you do things well over and over and over again, that is fantastic. And that's a great thing and good for you. But there will be things that you don't get right the first time. And you have to be able to deal with that. So the value in these lessons, going back to my failure, was that I recognized that what I did was dangerous and stupid and 100% preventable by things that I already knew but failed to implement. And I thought about that every time I took off from then on, just being aware of my surroundings and making sure that I don't make that mistake again. And that is something that I'll always be grateful for. Whether I ever fly again or not, the idea of being grateful for the lessons that my failures have taught me is applicable in every area of my life. Um, and while it did make me question myself temporarily, and relating that to the scenario at work with the other individuals, may make them question their proficiency, um, and their capacity at work there. What's important to remember is the value that we're getting here. And so, another Stoic philosopher, Epictetus, says something perfectly suited for this exact topic, and that is, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Because if you're ever going to get better at something, get comfortable with sucking at it first, because that is just a fact of life. If you're at a new job and you've been doing this job for 6 months and it's a complicated, difficult, demanding job, you are not going to be on the same level as the people that you're looking up to, as the people who've been doing the job for 10 years, 20 years. You're nothing even compared to yourself, 2 years from now. So get better at it. But getting better means that sometimes you're going to look like an idiot, and just be content with that. Use that, learn from it, and then use that to help somebody else learn from it later. And that's the whole point of the human condition of imperfection, is the value that it brings to ourselves and the people around us. And lastly, and most importantly, the failures that I've perpetrated and experienced as a husband. I'm certainly much better now than probably I've ever been. But communication can be difficult, especially when love is involved, because the stakes are high, the emotions are high, the value that you're placing on your words and the other person is high. So there's just pressure there to get it right. And, you know, as a young man, getting married at 19 and growing and maturing as an individual and as a couple through all of that time, I've said some horribly stupid things. And even when I'm trying to say something right and I'm trying to say nice things, or I am saying the right thing in my mind, my heart's in the right place, sometimes the words that fall out of my mouth are just ridiculous. And a lot of times that can be hurtful, or it is in the moment a step back relationally, whether that breakdown of communication violates trust or hurts feelings or creates barriers because I'm speaking as if I'm speaking to myself. And so I'm speaking in a way that I would best understand. And that's not an effective way to communicate with somebody else. You need to speak in a way that they best understand. And if you're going to be married for a long time, you better figure out what that communication method is. And of course, the only way to learn that communication method is one, just ask. Ask what speaks to that person and how they come to understand your true feelings and communication. Um, but at least for me, the proven way to learn how to improve on communication is to just continue to try and fail and mess it up, learn from it. If I don't understand what I did wrong, then I got to ask. And then when I still don't get it, I have to explain my intentions or my meaning. And then my wife is kind enough and patient enough to take my translation of my own thoughts and words and provide me with the information as to how she received it or how it sounds. And that's just a constant development of a skill between two people, is to learn how to speak and to learn how to listen. And so the lesson there is one, humility. Just know that even when you're thinking, feeling, and trying to say the right thing, it's not always going to be received the right way, or you're just not going to communicate in the way that you meant to. And so humbling yourself to be able to hear that you were wrong, or hear that somebody doesn't understand or doesn't appreciate what you're saying, and not take offense and not put up walls and not turn it into a point to hold your ground and argue, but instead to listen and grow from that. And that humility comes from the repeated experience of getting it wrong. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I certainly hope that I'm improving in that area every day. And so there's actually another quote from a Stoic philosopher, Seneca. He says, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." And I think that relates here because, when you value something, in the instance of a gem requiring friction, if you place value on something and you want to perfect something, there's going to be some rough parts. There's going to be something that you're going to have to go through. And a lot of times, personally, that comes down to getting things wrong through the effort of getting it right. You're never going to get it right if you don't try. So getting through those failings and making incremental improvements every single time and just keep getting at it is the only way to perfect what it is you're chasing. And that can sound scary or discouraging, to think that you just have to go through life failing over and over again. But that's just kind of the way it is. You're going to fail. I failed at something today. I'll fail at something tomorrow. And the day that I die, I still will not be perfect. And that's okay. But there is something that, God gives us in his word. Isaiah 41:10 says, "Fear not, I am with you. Do not be dismayed. I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And so you're never alone. Obviously, in some of the things that I've talked about, when you're failing at work, you've got your coworkers. When you're failing in relationships, you obviously have that person that you're in a relationship with. But even in the quiet things that you're suffering through, or the dreams or the goals or the standards that you have for yourself that nobody knows about, but you know you're failing, you are not alone. And you have someone who is promising to help you. And so just lean on that and just know that it's okay. And I know not everybody who listens to this is coming from the same perspective as me when it comes to faith. Um, Too bad, that's something we're going to keep talking about, and I hope that you don't dismiss it just on the basis of maybe not having that same belief system. Um, but recognize this and apply it to your life. Knowing that we're gonna fail, all have sinned and fallen short, but trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5. I know we've talked about this repeatedly, the idea of just being humble. And so when you fail, let your ego take the hit. Let your ego die. You don't really need it. Now, there are healthy applications of confidence, and I'm not saying to just push yourself down like that, but your strength and the best parts of you are not fully realized in just yourself. You have people around you and you have a God who loves you. And so that is how you learn to love failing. It never feels good in the moment. Obviously, like I said, I have plenty of failures under my belt at this point. And each time it happens, I don't enjoy it. However, I'm getting better at being quick to learn from it and getting that, hindsight 2020 sort of appreciation for it after the fact. And so I feel like maybe we kind of sped through this episode. So I apologize if maybe we left some things out. But of course, if you have questions about any of this or none of this makes sense or you strongly disagree with some of what I'm saying, let me know. I mean, email me, reach out on social media, and we can have a conversation and let's talk about, your own personal failings or how you feel like maybe, I failed in this way and there's no way I could ever recover. Or maybe you think that you're too far gone in something, or, I always thought I was going to do this by the time I was this age and now that's gone and I've failed. Let's talk about that because I can be terribly optimistic. And so I think we can find a way to realize that in most of these cases that you're beating yourself up over, you haven't actually failed. You're still on the journey. Just learn to have patience, grace, humility. And like I said, embrace and appreciate everything that happens to you. Not because everything that happens is good, but because you believe that you can get through it, that God can use any triumph or tragedy to create something beautiful in your life that you are worthy of because God has deemed you to be and because he loves you. And so I hope this communicates the point that I'm trying to get across and that this speaks to you. And again, if it does, let me know. If it doesn't, let me know. But thanks for tuning in again, guys. I really appreciate it. Take care.